Hello, everybody. It is Sunday, April 22nd, 2018. I am Corey Stolzenbach, joined by a very fascinating guest. This man was an outfielder in the major leagues from 1962 to 1975. Most of his career was spent with the Chicago White Sox. He spent 3 seasons with the Angels, 1974 with the Brewers, and 25 games in 1975 with the Indians. He made the All-Star team in 1967, won 2 Gold Gloves. He was a minor league winning manager and a technical advisor to the movie 8 Man Out, which was released in 1988. He is also author of several children's books and the 2015 book Twin Snipers, which is a novel. He is Ken Berry, and Ken, thank you very much for joining me. You were born in Kansas City, so what happened when you moved to Topeka, Kansas, and when did you move to Topeka?
I moved as a very young child of 3 months. I was adopted at 3 months old and moved to my folks, brought me to Topeka. Everybody asked me, why you have no problem with hot weather. Well, they picked me up in an old 41 Dodge or something. I can't remember. I wasn't, alert at that point as far as knowing cars, but it was an old car and it had no air conditioning, and my mother was very concerned, being a new mom, that I might catch cold, so they rolled the windows up, and it was probably 90 degrees when we were going down the road to Topeka, so warm weather's never bothered me.
So with you being adopted, was Berry your last name at birth, or was it something else?
Was it what?
Was Berry your last name at birth, or was it something else then, with you being adopted?
No, it was something else. I think it was Stanley Winchell, to be honest with you, but I'm not sure. That's what somewhere along the way I heard, and we tried. My wife and I tried to find out who my real parents were years ago. But Missouri is one of the toughest states to get any information and get any feedback. So we were never able to find out anything.
Well, that's very interesting. There might be something coming about in the future. You never know with all these genealogy searches you could find online. You never know.
Well, with my age, being almost 80 years old, I doubt that my real folks are still alive. So I doubt that I'll ever find out. But I'm not really that interested in. I was very happy with the parents I had.
Well, that's very nice. I understand your full name is Alan Kent Berry. For what reasons do you go by Ken, or do you choose to go by Ken?
I didn't care for Kent until Clark Kent came along as Superman, and I didn't find myself being a Superman kind of guy. So I don't know. When I was younger, I think my parents started calling me Kenny, and to me that was a little more like a youngish type A statement. So I shortened it to Ken, and that's what's been.
Well, that's very fascinating. With you growing up in Kansas, what early memories do you have of baseball? Were you a Cardinals fan growing up, since at the time they were the most Western-based team in the United States before the Dodgers and Giants moved there?
Well, I was just a baseball fan, but I used to listen to Harry Carey when I was in high school. When I ended up going after high school, I went to Western Kansas to play what they call Ban Johnson or BJ baseball at McPherson and Liberal, and somebody out there, had one of those super stations that I could pick up Harry Carey along the way, and I'd listen to the Cardinals. Of course, at that point when I was younger, I had all the baseball cards and I knew all the guys, so it was it wasn't that I was not following the Cardinals, but they were easy to follow. Those are the ones that we listened to.
That's understandable. You're talking about playing in a Ban Johnson League. I also understand you played Legion ball. What was the name of your Legion team, if you can remember?
Post 74, I believe. You're pushing me back to 1957. We won the state tournament, went on to play in the regional, and we ended up playing against Allie Reynolds, the old pitcher for the Yankees. We played against his son in the regional. He was playing for Oklahoma, and I think we played Denny Minke, that played with the Braves, I believe. Denny was playing for the Bancroft, Iowa team. So there were some there were some pretty decent players that we ran into.
Yeah, lots of talented ball players that play Legion ball over the years, but that's not all of it. You also played football, you did basketball, you did track and field in high school. What are some of the fondest memories that you have playing other sports, being in high school or in college? Because you also had a football scholarship in college. What are some of the fond memories you have of other sports playing?
Well, I wasn't very big when I was in junior high. I think in my 7th grade year I was 4'11" and 99 pounds, something like that. And when I got to where I was a 9th grader, sometimes you're in high school at 9th grade. I was in junior high or middle school. And I told my dad, I said I was concerned about the school that I was supposed to go to. It was 2,000 kids, biggest school obviously in town. We had 5 or 6 high schools now in Topeka, but I started looking at where my parents went to school. They went to it's called Washburn Rural, and it was rural. When I went there, it was like 300 kids. A lot of the kids were farm kids. They were either farm kids that lived out past the city limits, and their dads had small farms, or they were Air Force kids. Forbes Air Base is here in Topeka, and it is still active. And they've got the tankers, the big tankers that refuel the other planes. So you were either Air Force or farm kids, and 300 kids. I started going out my 9th grade year and watching them play, and decided that that's what I was going to do. And my sophomore year in high school, I started there, and I had to sit out a semester. So I sat out one semester. The last game of the year, we played the Haskell Indian Institute out of Lawrence, Kansas, and not being aware of we didn't have a very good team, and the past teams hadn't been very good. So we went down there, and I couldn't sit on the bench. I couldn't suit up, so because of my eligibility. So I sat in the stands. It was very cold. Last game of the year, and we got beat 81-0. And I thought, boy, did I make a bad decision. And in my junior year, they came to Topeka to play at our field, and we lost a 28-14. And then the next year, we went back down there, last game of the year, and we won 12-6. And that was when the Lonesome Inn was, you were eligible. You didn't have to go to the huddle. So I could run a sweep. I was the left half. I could run a sweep right, come back close to the huddle, tell my one of my players that I'm going to be out by the sideline. And I'd go stand right next to the sideline in front of our bench usually. And then the quarterback would come up having a dive play called. He would come up and look to the right, look to the left as he started to call signals to make sure no one was on me. So that play went for like 80 yards, and that was a play that beat the team, the other team. So 50 years later, I'm standing somewhere. I don't even remember where I was, maybe in the mall or something. I had a guy tap me on the back, and he said, I turned around and said hi, and he said, you don't remember me? And I said, no, I don't think I do. And he said, I was on the other team that when you ran that play, Coach had told me before the game started that if you went out into the stands and bought popcorn, I was supposed to go help you eat it.
Yeah, Aeneas Williams made a similar joke about covering Michael Irvin at his Hall of Fame induction speech. But what led you to choose baseball over the other sports?
Well, I liked football. When I went to Wichita State, freshmen were not eligible. I was 18 years old, and freshmen weren't eligible. We played 4 games, 2 freshman teams, I think. Texas, North Texas, and Tulsa, and then we played JUCO, and I don't remember the 4th game, but those were the only games we were allowed to play. So I practiced with the other teams, and then in spring we had spring practice, and I was running with the first team. Then they made a change. Hank Fulberg, who was at Army, he was a pretty rough guy as a coach. You know, Army people are not the softest people in the world. So he came in after Woody Woodward was there, and you know, being a dumb young high school kid, that this was the only experience I had. I just kind of went along with the flow, and we hadn't played much, so I just, you know, I wasn't sold on football. I just was used to playing all different sports, and when football was over, I went out for the basketball team there at Wichita State and made the basketball team after four of the guys that were on the varsity flunked out and on the freshman team. So I got to play, and I got to play with Bob Long, who was my roommate. And do you remember Bob Long?
I think I've heard the name before. I couldn't tell you too much about him.
You've heard the name before. If you'll think back to the Packer teams that won the Super Bowl.
Oh, yeah. Now I know, yeah.
Okay, you got him now? Well, he and I were roommates. He was a basketball player, and I was a football player, and we got together and kind of running around with each other. We were, fond of Pizza Hut. So Bob stayed, and after I signed a contract to play baseball with the White Sox that summer, Bob stayed and played 4 years of football, or basketball, and then somebody told the coaches that they needed to come over to the field next to the regular football field and look at the guy that was a wide receiver. So they went over and they saw Bobby scored 7 touchdowns that day, and so they asked him if he would come out for the football team the next fall, and he said, well, I'm not eligible. And he said, yeah, you are, because you have the fifth-year eligibility. You have 1 semester. So they told him they couldn't get any benefits. There was no, they wouldn't help him with his tuition and books, and he couldn't eat with the team. Well, the third week, he was leading the Missouri Valley in scoring with receptions, had like 6 touchdowns, and they said, you can start eating with the team now. So he did, and then he went through and finished the year, and the Packers drafted him in the 4th round, and so he ended up with Boyd Dowler, Carroll Dale, and Bart Starr, and all those guys. And the key thing was there was one Pizza Hut in the world. It was at Wichita, so he got the rights to the Pizza Huts up in Green Bay and up in that area. And so he put a bunch of Pizza Huts in and probably became a millionaire. And I couldn't believe that he forgot his old roommate.
Well, his old roommate didn't do that bad in the major leagues and afterwards, if you ask me. Which other teams besides the White Sox were interested in signing you, and how much were you offered by them?
It was interesting because I signed for $12,000 with the White Sox. I came home, and the Cincinnati Reds had a minor league team here in Topeka. And you'll remember these names: Davalil, Maloney, Helms, Harper, Rose, Queen. There are like 7 guys that were on that team that went to the big leagues for Cincinnati eventually. Well, they heard that I was going to, had been offered a contract with the White Sox. So Johnny Vandermeer was the manager, and he was the old pitcher. I think he threw 2 no-hitters.
Yep, in a row.
So he says, hey, kid, come on out here. And he said, I'm going to throw to you. I'm not going to tell you what's coming, and we'll see what you can do. So he did, and I swung the bat pretty good. And they challenged my intelligence when they said, well, we'll give you 4,000. The White Sox are going to give me 12. They were going to give me 4. So, I was decent in math, and that didn't make much sense to me. So I ended up signing, obviously, with the White Sox. And 2 years later, in Double-A ball in Savannah, Georgia, I was playing against all the guys that were there in Topeka, and I ended up, when I went to California, ended up rooming with Jim Maloney, who married a girl from Topeka. So small world.
It sure indeed is a small world, yes. Let's go back to high school for a second. When you talked about ineligibility for a semester, how come that was the case?
Well, I was in the city limits of Topeka. Wartburg Rural was outside the city limits, and I was supposed to go to Topeka High. Like I said, they had 2,000 kids, and my size to me dictated. I think I was 5'7" and 150 pounds probably, and my size dictated to me that I probably wasn't going to be able to play football and basketball, once I got to a big school like that. So that was really the reason. And when I transferred, I was transferring out of the district that I was supposed to go to another district. So anytime you do that, you have to sit out a semester.
Okay. And what interested you in Wichita State?
Well, they were the only four-year school that made me an offer for a scholarship. I had a scholarship offer from several smaller schools, and I was interested in K-State. I'm a Kansas State fan and always have been, and I wanted to go there, but they came down and looked at my grades and said that they weren't good enough, and I was pretty happy with a C. A C made me feel real good when I picked up my report card, so I wasn't worried about C's and D's, but they said that wasn't good enough, so that's why I didn't go to K-State.
I see, and so, but it all turned out well, and if it's okay, for a little bit in high school, I wasn't a great student either. It wasn't until my second half of high school that I became better, but, in the end, you made it all worth it. Your first season of minor league ball was in Clinton, Iowa. You hit .309 with 10 homers, 67 RBIs, 8 steals. You had a .345 batting average, .432 on-base percentage in 1962. Is there anybody in the minors you'd like to credit for the production that you had?
No, we didn't have hitting instructors. We didn't have outfield instructors. We didn't have, we had a manager that he was probably basically the general manager not the general manager, but the traveling secretary, the manager, the pitching coach, he threw batting practice, so he was pretty much everything until you got up to AAA, and then I think you had a pitching coach and a manager. But if we can regress back to 1961, I can give you an interesting story there. Opening day, we were supposed to play down in Quad Cities. So when we got there, it had been raining for days, and it looked like we weren't going to play the game, but they put a helicopter out on the field. They burned the infield off, and we actually got the game started a little late. And they were announcing the starting lineups, and when they did, they announced ours first because we were the visitors, and playing center field, Ken Berry. And then they announced the Quad Cities starting lineup, and playing center field, Ken Berry. So there were two Ken Berrys playing center field, and he had a bonus of $50,000, and I had a bonus of $12,000. So we hit it off because we stopped and kind of chatted with each other when nothing was going on before practice was started, and got to know each other. And then that day, opening day, he hit 2 home runs, and they won 3-1. And so my dad, I called him and I was going to tell him that I was 1 for 3 and had my first hit in professional baseball. And he had gotten the newspaper the next day, and it said that Barry homers twice and then gave the score, but we only scored 1 run, so he couldn't figure out how that was possible until I explained to him that Ken Berry was also on the other team. So it was a kind of a funny start to my career.
I'm sure it was, and that's happened a few times before in the major leagues, thinking about it now. I'm sure you remember back in the day there were 2 Hal Smiths, and later on in the 90s there were 2 pitchers named Greg Harris. So there was some kind of overlapping there, yes. And you talk about going 1 for 3. You were also 1 for 3 in your major league debut. That was September 9th, 1962 against Bob Baird. And so you said in a 2005 interview how nervous you were when you came to the plate for your first at bat, and you also saw minimal time in 1963 and 64. So which player or players do you think helped you get settled in at the major league level to help you adjust and maybe calm down and relax under pressure like that?
Well, I don't know that anybody in particular, because back then, you're only looking at 16 teams, and things were pretty competitive. So my first year in '65, my first full year, they had traded Mike Hirschberger and Jim Landis to Kansas City, and I think it was a three-way trade. We got Tommy Agee and Tommy John and maybe somebody else from Cleveland, and then Cleveland got somebody. I don't remember exactly how they. Oh, we got John Romano, I believe, too. So anyway, it was they basically gave me the center field job, and playing football, I'd had an injury when I was younger to my neck, and when I came out of spring training, I ended up with a muscle spasm in one side of my neck. I couldn't even tell you which one, but I was having trouble turning my head when I was chasing balls in the outfield. I was having trouble relaxing, and then as soon as we got to Chicago, the other side did the same thing, and so I was a mess for about half the year. I got ended up. I had an ulcer at the end of the year, so you can picture the kind of year I had. And halfway through, I started going to a Japanese chiropractor, Alfred Case Kawamura, I believe was his name, and he gave me muscle interruption. And for the folks that are listening that have been to a chiropractor and they know when somebody puts their elbow on your sore muscle and breaks it down, or their thumb, then that's a relieving type feeling. And that's what he did, and eventually my spasms were gone, and I was able to go out and perform quite a bit better. But my fielding was terrible. I think I made 6, 8, 10 errors. I can't even remember, but I was not happy with my fielding. So after that, it was fine, but that first year was tough. But I didn't have anybody really to rely on as far as, my roommate was Jerry McNertney, who we roomed together in AAA in Indianapolis. So I guess just, having someone to talk to. He was a catcher, so we didn't have a hitting instructor, to work with. We didn't have base running instructors, so we had older coaches that couldn't throw batting practice. And when you talk about the White Sox, everybody referred to the light hitting White Sox, but that wasn't really the case. We weren't that light hitting. It was just it was a matter that we didn't have anybody to turn to, and we had the big scoreboard in the center field in Comiskey, and there were lights and numbers and letters and everything. And people can say I'm making excuses, but nowadays it's illegal to have anything but a black background or a green background where you can see the ball coming out of the pitcher's hand. And then Eddie Stanky was our manager, and he had the groundskeeper wet down the area between home plate and the pitcher's mound about 30 feet out. They just soaked it because we had a slower infield. We had Moose Gowan at first, and Pete Ward at third. Ronnie Hansen, my roommate, after Jerry, was at short, and Jerry Adair, I think, or Wayne Causey at second. So these guys didn't have much range, and we had a bunch of sinker ball pitchers. So they were. He was trying to keep the ball in the infield since we were going to get a lot of ground balls, and it just made for Don Buford and I in 1966, I believe it was. We led the team, or maybe in 67, led the team in hitting at 241.
Right, well, those White Sox teams didn't have high batting averages, and we'll be talking more about that later. I want to talk about 1964 when you hit your first major league home run. This was against John O'Donohue, who was a lefty, pitched for the A's and later the
Right.
Pilots. He was teammates with McNerney on that Pilots team in '69. O'Donohue was.
Yeah.
This was a 3-run shot. Also scored Pete Ward and Dave Nicholson. So, do you remember what O'Donohue threw you when you hit your first home run, and what were you thinking when you were rounding the bases?
I'm sure it was a fastball, and I'll lead up to that a little bit because this was when they had the call-up at the end of the year, and they brought everybody up. So I had led the team in, I believe, in Indianapolis in home runs. I was the most valuable player. I had like 80 RBIs, 80, 90 RBIs. So I had 20 home runs in AAA. So when I came up, I was a much different player than I was in 1962, and my knees were shaking, and I got my first major league hit. I think I hit 375 when they brought me up, and Al Lopez just stuck me in the lineup and said, "Hey, you're going to play every day," and we ended up finishing, I think, one game behind the Yankees. I think the Yankees had to win 6 games in a row. They had 3 doubleheaders with Cleveland, and they won all 6 games, or we would have probably been in the World Series. So, I was a little more confident. We were in Kansas City, which was home for me, and I'm sure O'Donoghue threw me a fastball, and I hit it out. So, but I couldn't tell you anything else. I couldn't tell you what I was thinking running around the bases because it's just another game and another at bat.
Well, those were some crazy pennant races in the 60s, and you're right. You guys were one game back. You guys won 9 straight to finish the
Yep.
1964 season, and you still missed on the pennant to the Yankees. Do you think you could
Yep.
have beaten the Cardinals in the World Series that year?
Do I think we could have beaten the Cardinals?
Do you, in your opinion, do you
Well,
think yes?
was the big guy, the right-hander pitching for him at the time?
You're talking about Mr. Gibson, correct?
Yep.
Yeah, he was
He
pretty tough.
was, wasn't he?
He was, yeah. He won the World Series MVP
Yeah.
that year.
Yeah, I don't think he beat that. We would have beat him. That guy was amazing, and he'd win 2 or 3 games in the World Series every time they were in it. So nothing against my guys, the White Sox, but I would, and I'm not a betting man, but if I was, I would have bet on the Cardinals, I'm afraid.
Well, I saw in that '05 interview, I read the transcript. Apparently, in '64, when you were in Indianapolis, your manager was Les Moss, a former catcher for the St. Louis Browns, and later on he would
Yeah.
manage the White Sox at the major league level. According to you, you said that he helped change the position of your hands, and you hit very well down the stretch. So what was the position of your hands before he worked on it, and what was the position of your hands afterward?
Well, I was in the normal position where the hands are a little bit above the shoulders and back, and I had a tendency to drop my hands, and so I was having a little trouble getting around on the ball. So what he did is he suggested that I open my feet up with a more of an open stance, and I found that I could see the ball much better. And then he told me to drop my hands down. And I've done this with some of the kids that I work with here in Topeka when I give batting lessons, is when I see a kid really drop his hands, I know that he's going to be under the ball and have a tendency to lift it or pull off of it. So I put the hands just down in a relaxed position somewhere below the shoulders where it's like you're just standing there with your elbow right against your body and your hands away a little bit, so they're down lower. And then when you load your hands up, the only place they can go is up, because that's where your arm and your hands are going to go. And by doing that, rather than going down from a position up high, then what you're doing is you're putting your hands in the proper hitting position where you can then throw the bat at the ball. And I found that I was much quicker. I could see the ball better. I could stand a little closer to the plate. So it helped my power. But when I went from that that winter, I went to spring training. I tried to recover that and copy it the next year, and I couldn't do it. So I went back to my old ways, and eventually, I played around with, like I'm sure a lot of hitters do, they play around with their stance a little bit and make a small adjustment here or there to see if they can get back where they might have been before. And, eventually, I think I don't remember what year it was, 67 maybe, or 66. I think I hit 271 that year. When they had the turf, they put turf in. And then when Stanky came in, he said, I'm not having turf. My pitchers are sink-a-ball pitchers, and that's not going to help our team. So that's when we went back to the sod infield, and our averages went down again.
Here's the thing, is that I understand that you yourself have claimed before in the past that you actually didn't learn or know that much about hitting until after your playing career. I understand that you took up slow pitch softball and then you learned more about the art of hitting that way.
I learned about balance is what I basically learned about, because I used to have a tendency to overstride, and I was aggressive. There was no problem with being aggressive, but I ended up getting myself out of a good balanced position, and my hands were good enough, and I saw the ball, so I could take my hands to the ball, and I got I'm sure a lot of pitchers that were upset with me because I hit a lot of balls that I would top them and roll them down the third base line. I was pretty fast. I could beat those out, and when I got into a ball pretty good, I'd hit it the other way, and I really didn't try to pull the ball. So that was a difficult situation for me to get the balance that I needed. And I watched Ken Harrelson one day. We were in Cleveland, and I was watching him hit, and I noticed that he picked his left foot, the heel, picked it up, and that put his weight on the back foot. And I tried that, and it worked pretty good for me for a while. But when I got released and I went home, it was in the middle of June, I think, or the end of June. And I had a good friend that was, his dad sponsored the, probably one of the top, if not the top, slow pitch team in Kansas. So he asked me if I wanted to play, and I said, yeah, as long as I don't have to play outfield and chase balls. I said, I'd rather pitch or play third base. So they let me play third base. And what he did is he threw me some batting practice, and I couldn't wait on the ball. As if there's people out there listening that are familiar with slow pitch softball, if you can't wait on the ball, you're not much of a threat. So I started picking my front foot up and keeping it in the air like a pitcher for a split second or two, and then the weight stayed on the back leg. And when I did that, when I put it down, I was able to then attack the ball, and that was really the key to what I said is how I learned how to hit. And after that, I started giving hitting lessons here in Topeka, and I've been doing it for over 30 years. So I give lessons here in Topeka, in Kansas City, and some of the surrounding towns. So it was quite a wake-up call for me to start to feel like at least that I understood hitting and understood balance, which balance and timing, for people that might be listening, if there's any kids listening or coaches, balance and timing are pretty much the main factors when you're talking about hitting. So, if you're out of balance, you might picture a little more weight on the back foot, just a little bit, and if you keep the weight against that front foot, then you can use your backside and get your hands through the ball. So, it's all relative, but I figured out that I didn't know a whole lot about hitting, and like I said, we didn't have a hitting instructor per se. So it was not like when I got into coaching professionally, where I'm I'm looking at guys like Charlie Lau and, the guys that really knew the ins and outs of hitting. It was very interesting to sit down and listen to those guys with their work ethic.
And I'm sure you applied some of these techniques later as a coach and when you're on the set of 8 Men Out. 8 Men Out.
Yeah, I did. With 8 Men Out, it was kind of an interesting situation because I had just finished managing in Appleton, Wisconsin. And Don Leppert with the Twins was managing the team in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And they had just finished winning like 12 or 13 out of their last 15 games to catch up with us, who we were in first place the majority of the year, and they didn't play halves, so there was no playoff between the two teams in the first half and two teams in the second half. So they knocked us out with right at the end. So I called him up on the phone and congratulated him, and he said, "What are you doing when you go home?" I said, "Oh, I'll probably go home and hunt and fish like I usually do, and I'll have to get a job of some sort, to do a little work to make ends meet." And he said, "Would you like to be in a movie?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, I had this lady call me, or this guy, and they're doing a movie about the Black Sox scandal, and they wanted me to come down and be the technical advisor, but I can't go. I've got to go to Instructional League, and I'm going to run that." He said, "So if you're interested, give this guy a call." So, okay. So I called the guy, and he said, "Yeah." He says, "How much do you want?" Well, being a person that I've never been used to making a whole lot of money, I am not a greedy person either. At least I don't think I am. And I told him, I said, "Well, how long am I going to be there?" And he said, 2 months, and we'll be in Indianapolis. You'll be there for 6 weeks, I believe it was, and then go home for a week or 10 days, and then we'll do some filming in Cincinnati, and then we'll come back and we'll finish up filming in Indianapolis. And I said, "Well, if it's 2 months, $5,000, and he said, "Okay." So he said, "Be there in September, whatever it was, or October, whatever it was, and early October, late September." And so I went down, and of course the guys that were there, that were the actors, were pretty decent. I mean, they had some good ability for me to work with. So it wasn't like I had to do a whole lot, but D.B. Sweeney was probably, between him and Lefty Williams, the pitcher. He was right-handed throwing, and he had to throw left-handed in the movie. And D.B. was right-hand hitter, and he had to hit left-handed. So I had to basically do some pretty good work with D.B. as far as his hitting, because he had to hit left-handed and it had to look realistic. Now, he could run and he could throw, and he was a pretty decent outfielder, as was Charlie Sheen. And Cusack, John Cusack was decent. He had some quickness at third base. He had to play third base and make a diving catch. So the interesting part for me was once these guys got together, we had about a week to work out, and then John Sayles, who was very, very good to work with, he said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do tomorrow. We're going to need for you to have Charlie Sheen run into," he was playing Happy Phelps, "we need to have him run into the fence." And the problem was the fence in Indianapolis was it's just like a fence in Wrigley Field. It's made out of brick. And so there was one area that there was a big gate that opened up, and it was made of tin, or solid metal, but not real thick, where there was a little give to it. And the only problem was at the bottom of it, there was a little ridge about 1 inch long that stuck out, and it was about a half-inch thick. And I don't know what it was there for, but anyway, that was down around the areas of the knee. And so I told Charlie, and I showed him, I said, now I'm going to be throwing the ball. You're going to run onto the warning track, and I'll get the ball there in time for you to catch it. Take one step, jump up against this fence, which actually will act a little bit as a springboard. And when you hit it, it'll kind of throw you back out on the warning track. And then that way you're not running flat into it and running your knee right into that ridge that stuck out. And so he said, okay. So we kind of walked through it, and I did it and showed him what I wanted. And he said, okay, I'm ready. So he took off, and I threw the ball, and he caught it. He forgot to jump, and he ran his knee right into that that little ridge. And then, of course, he came back and did it again and did it properly. But, you know, it was just every day John would tell me, he said, okay, we're doing this today. And my shortstop was supposed to be a guy that was a real rough and rough talking, rough acting guy that didn't like Eddie Collins, who was a college guy. They call him, you know, college boy. And he was a second baseman, and he was a dancer on Broadway. Okay, so he never played baseball. So we had to work on fielding, and the scene was he was going to dive and get a ball, and then laying down, flip it to the shortstop coming across the base, who was then going to throw the ball as the runner came in and took him out after he released the ball, and he fell, and they were going to fall side by side, looking right into each other's face, and then they were going to get up, and he was going to, you know, say something smart alecky to the college boy, and the college boy was going to get back at him verbally. So they were going to argue all the way to the dugout, which they did. But, you know, to imagine a guy that was a dancer fielding a ground ball and diving for it to start with, and then laying on the ground and flipping it to the shortstop, who comes across the base and then has to jump up in the air and get taken out and fall down while making a decent throw. You know, there were some situations that Sales put me in that were pretty difficult to create, but the guys did a great job of pulling it off.
And you also had a minor part in the movie, too. You also had a minor role in the movie, I understand, too.
Yeah, I was, you know, verbally, whenever I coached, and when I coached outfield in the minor leagues, I had several years that I did that. I like to get the guys out in the area where they're going to be, and then briefly give them a little heads up on, this is what we're going to do, and this is why, and what I want you to do, and then I'd go back and I'd work with the machine. You have a machine that will throw fly balls or line drives or whatever you want it to do. But being probably 80 yards to 90 yards away, or sometimes not quite that far, I would have to yell. So I was used to yelling at the guys, you know, and saying, that was great, but you could do this, and, you know, make you better balance when you caught the ball and ready to throw. So while I was doing the movie, I wasn't always, you know, right there with them. When I was talking, I was yelling at John Cusack at third base from the outfield, or I was yelling at Charlie Sheen or D.B. Sweeney, who were in the outfield from the infield, because we were hitting balls or doing something that required them to run after it, and I couldn't be out there with them. So the girl that was the casting agent, she cornered me one day, and she says, I've got a role for you in this movie. And so I said, really? And she said, yeah. She said, I think that Lefty Williams is in on the fix, and he's supposed to lose the game, but we're not, the guys, the gamblers were not convinced that he was going to do that. And so we need you to come up to Lefty Williams and ask him if that's his wife that's standing over there, and he would say yes. And I would tell him that, if you wanted her alive by next week, you probably better consider losing that game tomorrow, and seriously consider it. And so I went to my room, and I didn't have, but 2 or 3 lines, but to learn. So I'm up in my room for a while, and I thought I learned the lines okay, and I understood the gist of my role and all that. So I went back and I told her, and she said, "Well, forget it." She said, "I do have the role for you, and that's the heckler." And she said, "You're going to sit up in the stands and you're going to heckle." So my role was to get on D.B. Sweeney, who was Shoeless Joe Jackson, who was illiterate, couldn't read or write. So he hits a triple, and he hits it left-handed off the right field fence, and he slides into third. And my job then was to stand up and yell at him and say, "Hey, Jackson, can you spell cat? Hey, Shoeless Joe, can you spell cat? Have you read any good books lately? Blah, blah, blah." Well, he finally got tired of it, and he stood up and he asked me, he gave me a question. I can't repeat it over the air here, but, it was kind of funny, and I kind of sat down and shook my head. I was sitting right next to my old roommate in AAA, or 1 year in AAA, was Dick Kenworthy, who played for the White Sox. And he lived in Indianapolis, so I called him up, and I said, "Hey, would you like to be in a movie?" And he said, "Sure, why not?" So he's sitting right next to me. He's got a little derby hat on, and we had a good laugh about it. But yeah, I enjoyed it. It was something that was kind of natural for me because I was coaching, and the role was not that tough. The only hard part about it was John Sayles came up to me. He says, "Okay, you ready to go with your heckling?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I think so. I've got it down. I think I can do it." And he said, "We've only got 30 minutes." And he says, "We probably better get it done in one take." And so we did a one take. So, I feel pretty good about my acting career. Nobody has called me to follow up, but I'm still waiting.
Yeah, 30 years later. Speaking of which, how much have you kept in touch with the rest of the casting crew in those 30 years? How much have you talked to them at all? Okay.
Zero, nada, zilch.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's kind of like, okay, you're a baseball guy. We're actors. We got to get on and with our job, and you go ahead and do yours. So that's kind of how it went, which was fine. But I enjoyed getting to meet the guys. They were fun, and we had a good time.
Well, that sounds fantastic. Going back to '64 and the pennant race, and what do you think it was that the White Sox did so well during that 9-game winning streak? And not just that, but you hit well down the stretch. How does somebody with such little experience at the big league level step up like that in a pressure situation in the middle of the pennant race, and you guys win 9 in a row? And how much would you credit both what Les Moss taught you and also how well those teams at Indianapolis played when you were there?
Well, we won the pennant in '63 and '64, I believe. Raleigh Hemsley was the manager in '63, and I know we won the pennant then, and I think we won it in '64. But when I came up, like I said, I had a really good year, and being a little bit, I don't refer to myself as out of it or flaky, but I didn't even get into the part where we were, still had a chance to win the pennant, because I was given the job, and I just went out and did the best I could, and I'd come off of a really good year, and so I didn't feel like I had to prove anything because we were winning, and it was a lot of fun, and I was there for about a whole month, so I don't remember how many games I played, but I know I hit well, and helped us win. but the guys accepted me, and nobody gave me a hard time or anything. And Jim Landis was a professional about it. I mean, I was taking his job, and he'd been the center fielder in for the White Sox for years. So I mean, he could have maybe made it a little tougher on me, but the goal is to win, and the guys, they were used to being in the race because we had such a good pitching staff and we had good defense. And Louis Aparicio, Nellie Fox, Sherm Lawler, I mean, we had plenty of guys that could play the game. So I just went up there and I really didn't give it a thought, to be honest with you, about, I wasn't nervous, and I just had fun. And, after I look back on it, I'm going, man, I didn't realize it, but if we'd had the Yankees that would have lost a couple games, we'd be playing in the World Series right now, because there were no playoffs, back then. We just went, if you won, you went right to the World Series.
Right, yes, and all those crazy pennant races in the 60s. And the other side, the National League was probably even crazier, because the Cardinals, they start out the year 28-31 when they acquire Lou Brock. The Phillies, they're up, of course, the infamous fall. They're up by 6 games with 12 to go, and then they lose 10 in a row. Yep. And then the Reds, they get red hot down the stretch, and they end up at a tie with Philadelphia for second place. And the Cardinals, they themselves won the pennant, their first since 1946. And 64, when you guys were with Indianapolis, you guys went 89-69. You finished in second place. But yes, indeed, you guys did win the pennant the year before. And so,
yeah, right.
Talking about those spasms, how much did those spasms force you to play differently?
How much did what?
How much did the spasms that you had in 65 from the injury in football, how much did that force you to play differently?
I mean, you're an announcer. Yeah, you do broadcasts and stuff. If you can imagine having a strep throat and not being able to talk, and then trying to perform as an announcer and do your thing, that's like trying to go out and catch a fly ball when you're running and you can't turn your head one way or the other to look at the ball. So you're looking at everything out of the side of your eyesight. You're looking sideways, trying to turn your head, but you can't do it. So, like I said, I don't remember, you have the stats there. I know you got all that stuff. I don't remember the number of errors that I made that year, but it was bad. And there was one period from 69 till 73 that I think that I was either I led the American League in fielding percentage, or I was second, and I never made more than 2 errors, I don't think, in a year. So, for somebody like myself that was a perfectionist and worked hard on my defense, I mean, it was a bad year for me. And I think that's probably why I ended up with an ulcer. The hitting didn't bother me that much, but the fielding was just tearing me up.
I know how much you really enjoyed fielding, because I know you loved robbing home runs. You certainly did, and you had 7 errors. You had 7 errors in 1965, and also you led the American League in fielding percentage as a center fielder in 1969, 1972, and 1973, when, of course, we won that Gold Glove with the Angels in 72.
Yep. Yeah, it was, because I think the reason, and I didn't touch on this, but when they signed me as a third baseman, and I played third base out in the Liberal, and I was playing as a 19-year-old with 1 year in college. I was playing with guys that were out of Oklahoma State, Texas University, Texas Tech, the big baseball schools. I was playing with them, and I was holding my own, and I played third base and did a pretty good job. So they signed me to play third base. Well, I got to spring training, and spring training was different for me from the standpoint of playing infield. The infields down there were sandy. It wasn't a dirt. They're not a dirt infield, and it just messed me up big time, I think, mentally, because I was having trouble catching the ball when they were hitting ground balls to me. So they approached me nicely and said, see that guy out there in center field? And I said, yes. I said, go see him. So I went out to center field, and Johnny Mostel, who people have never heard of, I'm sure, he was out there in a suit, and he was 83 years old, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and had one leg about 6 inches shorter than the other. So he was not going to be able to run and show me, what he wanted me to do. But he was there and could talk to me. And so we had somebody hitting fungos, fly balls or ground balls, and there were several of us out there. And so he would say, okay, he called me Bear. He said, okay, Bear. That's the way he talked. Okay, Bear, it's your turn, man. Go get it now. Go get it. Yeah, that's it. Well, he didn't realize that I was a wide receiver in football, and I loved chasing footballs, catch them. So baseball, obviously, was rounder and not oval, and it was smaller, but I loved chasing it. So I was like a Labrador retriever. I would go out and I would chase balls off the bat all day long. And in fact, one year, the best year I ever had was with California, hitting-wise. I think I hit 289. And May 1st, I decided that, when you take batting practice, your team hits for like 45 to 50 minutes. And I decided that I was going to shag the whole thing. I was not going to take batting practice. So I shagged, and I worked up I ran after every ball that I thought I could catch. So I worked pretty hard, and I told the pitchers, stay out of this area because I'm going to be going after a ball. If I don't see you, I'm going to accidentally run over you, and it won't be on purpose, but I want you to know that me working to catch fly balls is going to help your ERA, so take that in consideration, and please get out of my area. So they did. They stayed away, and I played a little game where the guy that was backing up the shagging was behind the screen. He knew that when I got a ball, I was going to turn and throw it. I was going to throw it to him, and hopefully on one hop where he could catch and pretend that he was making a tag. So he was ready. And so I spent the whole 45 minutes just running as hard as I could. And I went in, and I would take a shower, and I would eat a couple of candy bars, the Hershey bars, and drink a big glass of milk and take a nap for 20, 30 minutes. And then I'd go out and play. Well, that night I got 2 or 3 hits. I did it again the next night, and I got 2 or 3 hits. And so I said, I don't need batting practice. I'm just going to go out and shag and work hard, and I'd lose up to 5 pounds. I mean, I was sweating. And so I'd go in and take my shower and eat my candy bars and drink my milk and take my nap and go out and play the game. And I ended up, at one point during that year, I don't remember where I was, but I was eating breakfast, and it was a Sunday morning, and I picked up the Sunday paper, and normally I started at the bottom of the page where they give the averages, because in the years past, a lot of them, that's where I was, somewhere in the bottom third. So I picked up the paper, and I looked, and I looked, and looked, and I kept going, and I got to the top, and I was leading the American League in hitting. It was sometime in June or July. So, it went downhill after that, but, I didn't end up leading the league. But I was, doing a pretty good job of hitting along with my fielding.
How would you compare timing a football, catching a football as a wide receiver, to compare to timing your jumps when trying to rob a home run?
Exactly the same. You have to catch the ball at a certain point, whereas a wide receiver runs. When you get to the ball, if you have to jump, you've got to try to catch it at its peak so that the defender doesn't end up knocking it away. And when you make your cuts, your timing is the important part about when you make your cut and you start like a 10-yard out. The quarterback is throwing the ball as you're making your cut, and so it's there 2 steps after you make your cut, and then you got to receive it. Well, in baseball, the only thing I was concerned about, and the outfielders around me knew that I was going to get everything I could, and every now and then I might call for a ball that was really theirs, but they didn't mind because they knew that way we were going to make the out. And it wasn't like I was trying to be a hog, but you want to make sure that you get the outs. So I might call one a little early, but I knew I had it. So, and I knew my range. I knew what I could do, how far I could go, and because with all the work that I put in, I had to know the wind, I had to know the sun, I had to know the conditions. Plus, I read every ball off the bat, so it made a big difference for me to, my confidence. So I think it helped everybody along the way. So, but as far as robbing guys at the fence, well, I did that, and I made probably the best catch I ever made was in Baltimore, and Andy Messerschmidt was pitching, and we were ahead by 1 run. I think it was either 2-1 or 3-2, and there were 2 on and 2 outs, and it was late in the game, and I think it was either Terry Crowley or I can't remember the other left-hander that they had, but he hit a ball toward left center. It wasn't in left center, but it was toward left center, and I was playing him straight away. And when I got to the fence, I jumped up and put my spikes in the fence. It was one of those chain link fences. I put my spikes in the fence, and then I vaulted, which I was a high jumper and a pole vaulter, so, being around the fence and jumping and all that, it kind of came natural for me. So I pushed off, and when I caught the ball, it was a little bit behind the fence, and the top of the fence, which was 9 feet high, the top of the fence was right at my belly button. So when I went over and I actually caught the ball, it was past the fence, and my glove went down and hit the fence, and I kind of bent in a U or a V, where my stomach was on the top of the fence, my head and my arm went over, and I hit the back of the fence with my glove, and it just kind of sprung me back up on top of the fence. So then I just jumped down and I held the ball up and went on in. But that was, I don't know that I've ever, to be honest with you, they told me that they had the film of it, and they were going to get it to me. And then I think the manager, either Hank Bauer or the little short guy that smoked, I don't think they wanted me to have that film, because the next day the guy came back to me and said they had the film from the TV station, said that they didn't have it. So I never got to see it. And I was kind of looking forward to going to my days in the nursing home and being able to sit there and watch that from my bed, but it doesn't look like it's ever going to happen.
Well, hey, you're not at that level yet, Ken. You don't have to worry about that just yet. You're not in the nursing home just yet. Good, you're good for you, because I know you're still very active, so that's very good. You guys finished in second in 65, just like you had done in 64, and they did so in 63, and not to mention the crazy pennant race of 67. So of all those White Sox teams that you played on, and they had the best record in the American League between 63 and 67, the Sox did. Which one do you think was the best?
I think 67 was probably the most unique year, because we kind of did what we did the year that we won 9 in a row. We got hot. I remember we wiped out the Twins, and we beat Cleveland in Cleveland, and it was a real good race. And we got down to the last 5 games, and we had a game and a half lead with 5 games to go, and we were in Kansas City for a doubleheader and a single game, and then, a doubleheader, and one of them was a rain-out makeup, and then we were going back home to play the Washington Senators, and those 2 teams were the worst teams in baseball. And so we were looking pretty good with a game and a half lead and 5 games to play, and we went in and lost the doubleheader to Kansas City, went home, and lost 2 games in a row to Washington, and we lost. Phil Ortega pitched a shutout. He beat us 1-0 the first game of the 3-game set, and by the time we finally beat them, it was the 3rd game, and we were a couple games out by then, or a game and a half out, and ended up 2 games out, I believe. And I was driving down 55, headed toward St. Louis, and listening to Detroit and the Angels, I believe, playing a doubleheader, and then, it was just kind of a sick feeling when you could have been there playing in the World Series, and you ended up going home.
Well, that's baseball. Baseball is a very strange game, and it just goes to show you, because they're the 2 bottom teams of the league, like you said. I think of the amazing start the Red Sox have gotten off to this season, starting the season 17-2, and their 8-game winning streak was snapped by a no-hitter by Sean Manaea of the A's last night. So it just goes to show you that on any given day. I'm sure that 1-0 loss must have been especially tough for our listeners out there. The only run that scored was Tim Cullen, and he reached on an error by Ty McCraw, who was playing first base in that game. So that must have been especially tough. That was the Ortega shutout that you guys lost 1-0. But what could you guys have done better, and what could you yourself have done better in during that losing streak? Because I believe you went 2 for 11 down the stretch in those last handful of games. What could you have done differently there?
Well, hit some holes, driven in some runs. I don't know. We were in a funk. It was a weird finish, because we played so well, and like you said, that's baseball. Well, that is baseball, where a team can be just smoking along and everything's going right, and then all of a sudden you run into a team that's hot, and your pitchers are maybe struggling a little bit. A couple of the guys that are your starters, your number 1 and number 2, have a bad game, and pretty soon you've lost 4 or 5 in a row, and it just turns around. So it's a difficult situation, but that's why they play the games. And you'll find if you go through and look at a lot of the background in baseball, is there are teams that have never been very good, but for some reason they always play well against teams that are really good, and they seem to either play 500 against them or even better than that. And then there are other teams that they couldn't beat a team. It didn't make any difference what year it is. They're not able to compete with them. And the Yankees have been in that position going back into the 50s and 60s, where they were just a tremendous team, and nobody could beat them. So, but then eventually things turn around, and now they've got Judge and Stanton, and their lineup is dynamite, but they've been struggling a little bit too. So, if you go back to the basics with baseball, pitching, and this is something that I think we're getting away from now, is pitching, speed, and defense. I'll take those 3 anytime, and I'll take my chances. If I'm going to manage and I have pitching and speed and defense, we'll figure out a way to scratch out 4 or 5 runs. I just firmly believe that. But because there are a lot of teams nowadays, they don't use the hit and run. They don't start their runners when the count's 3-2, because there's so many people striking out that now it's like, well, if I start the runner and he swings and misses, they're going to throw him out, and so they get a double play. So I don't start the runner. and I don't have a guy that steals 60 bases for me. So that's the advantage of having a team. I think it's only my opinion that you have a lot of guys that hit between 260 and 280 that make contact, because I can do a lot of stuff as a manager if I'm aggressive, and you guys that can bunt for a hit, and they can read pitchers. That's why Rusty Kuntz was so important with Kansas City, and now he's unable to coach first base because I guess his eyesight got so bad they were worried about him getting hit with a line drive, so they had to take him off first base. So now they've got a young outfielder that didn't have any coaching experience at all. Mitch Meyer is coaching first base. So I would almost bet if you check the stats at the end of the year and see what the stolen bases were when Rusty was there, and then check and see what the stolen bases are after this year is over, I don't think there's going to be. It's not even going to be close. So, that to me, that's the difference. Is you gotta what they call is they're trying to change the launch angle of the guys' bats now, where they're swinging up through the ball to hit it out of the park, rather than swinging through the ball and hitting a lot of doubles and triples, that's what got the Kansas City Royals years ago when they got into the World Series, and that was when Whitey Herzog was managing. That was the kind of team they were. They were speed, pitching, defense, and they hit a lot of doubles and triples, and they could make contact, they could steal bases, and that you can put a lot of pressure on the other team when you're doing that. But if you're not starting runners and you don't have guys that can bunt for a hit, you're not going to scare the other team. They know what you're going to do, and they just have to make good pitches, and they can get you out. So the game is changing, I believe.
It sure is, and last year broke an all-time record from 2000 for most home runs this season. Last year also most strikeouts in the season. I know you got to have opinions on all the pace of play initiatives and all the changes that have been going on in the recent years. Talk about the pitch clock that they want to do to implement that soon, and the new limits on mound visits. You can only have 6 mound visits allowed, and 1 allowed per extra inning, of course. And then you have getting rid of the intentional walk of the 4 pitches and the time mound visits. I'm sure you gotta have an opinion on that. What's your make on all these pace of play changes?
Yeah, I do have an opinion. I've had this opinion for a long time, that ever since I started complaining about the games being longer, which has been years. You have to go back about 15, 20 years ago, when I started coaching. I was coaching professionally for 26 years out of about 30 years. So I was very aware of, because I was teaching one of the things that I discussed earlier with base running, where you're reading a pitcher and you're trying to steal a base based on what he does when he's going to be quick to home. And quick to home, we're talking about this. That's why you see all the first base coaches have stopwatches. They're watching the pitcher, and when he starts his motion to throw home, they start the stopwatch, and when the ball actually gets to the catcher's glove, they click it. And if it's 1-3 or below, they know that unless you have a guy that is exceptional with the speed, you're going to have a good chance to be thrown out, because the average speed, the average time from first base to second base is about 3.4. So if you've got a guy that runs 3.3, 3.2, 3.1, something like that, you're probably going to steal a base anyway. But if you have a catcher that catches the ball and he gets rid of it and it gets to second base in 2 seconds or less, which Perez for Kansas City, it's about 1/8, which is unbelievable. So then that's going to cut down on the stealing. But they've been very concerned about and aware of how do we stop the running game. That's what the terminology in baseball, that's what you would hear. How are we going to stop the running game? Well, what they're going to do is the catcher, if you'll watch, just pay attention, to the game, watch the catcher. What does he do? Does he sit there and put down the signs and not look anywhere when there's a runner that can run on first base? No. He looks in the dugout. The manager touches his nose, his ear, the bill of his hat, his nose, his other ear, his chin. Okay, he's got 5 signals that he's given to the catcher. He's giving the pitcher, then the catcher's got to relay that to the pitcher. One of them is hold the ball, don't throw it. Just sit there and hold it. And you'll see that the hitter will call timeout, or the pitcher will just stand there. Then he's got another one where you hold the ball, then you step off real quick with your back foot. You're trying to see if that runner flinches like he was going to go. So if he was, then you put on the pitch out. So where the pitcher pitches, but he throws it outside, so the catcher catches, makes it even quicker to second base. If the guy's going, he's out. Okay, then you have the slide step, which means that the pitcher, instead of picking his leg all the way up and then throwing the ball, he slides his foot back quickly, and then he pitches quickly, so that he's in that 1.1 or 1.0 time to home plate. So then the manager's over there, he's got 4 or 5 different signs that he's got to give. Then he relays them to the catcher. The catcher then relays them to the pitcher. And sometimes you see the pitcher step off because he can't remember what he was supposed to do, so he calls the catcher out. So there's one of your visits where the catcher's got to go out, or he's got to start all over again. So to me, there's an extra 10 or 15 minutes if you've got guys on the team that are getting on that can steal. Okay, so you're trying to stop the running game. Well, to me, that's where a lot of it comes in. So I know that's my own personal opinion, but having been around the game for 41 years, I think that's probably a good part of it.
But do you...
did you learn anything there?
Yes, I think I've learned quite a lot, but do you agree or disagree with the initiatives, though?
I think there's much to talk about the game being too long. I think that the visits to the mound, I think that's probably okay. I know my daughters and my granddaughters play softball. My daughter and my granddaughters, and in softball, you can say, okay, I'm going to put them on, and you don't have to throw the 4 pitches. But I've seen Major League games won and lost because the pitcher can't take the stretch and throw the ball to the catcher. As he steps outside, he throws it over his head, and the guy from third scores. The guy from second goes to third, and then they drive him in with a sac fly or something. So I'm not all sold on the fact that they should be able to say, yeah, put them on. We don't have to throw the pitches. I'm not a big booster in that, because it doesn't take that long. You can speed that up and make it quick. And if pitchers can do it, it's like pitchers. Some pitchers can't field their position, and so they go in to field a bunt, and they fall down, or they slip, or they throw the ball away, or they can't get it quick enough. And that's where the other team, I mentioned taking advantage of anything you can, and that's what Eddie Stanky was good at. He would find the weakness of the other team, and he would exploit it. And that's what you have to do. And I think, instead of just, okay, we're going to throw to these guys, and hopefully they don't hit it out of the park, and hopefully we can strike them out and all that. There's a lot more. There used to be a lot more to the game with the thought process that went into the strategy. I got help from my bench coach over here, my wife. So the strategy of the game has a lot to it. Back then, there was all kinds of strategy, but now I don't think that there's nearly as much.
Are you telling me then that the shift is not a form of strategy, though?
The shift, that's part of that is, and that started back. Let's see, where was I with Gibby? About 2002. I was with John Gibbons in Double-A in Binghamton, New York, and Gibby said, "Hey, would you do our positioning for the defense?" I said, "Yeah." So we have a spray chart, and the spray chart is just a picture of a field, and then you put the guy's name on it, and every time he has an at bat, you indicate and draw a line or a jagged, not a jagged line, but a line where it's not really a line; it's just little dots to where it took place, or you put LD, line drive, or line out, LO, and fly ball is a high fly ball, deep fly ball, wherever they hit it, and then you put little notations, at least I did, so I had a feeling by about the 12th to 15th at bat that I saw that guy. So probably in the third or fourth game, being a center fielder and doing what I did, I studied and really concentrated on where the ball was going to go when it was hit, and I spent a lot of time figuring out how I could get better at that. So watching other teams hit, when their hitters hit, I felt like I had a good feel for where the ball was going to be going after about 12 or 13 at-bats. Then I could set up my outfielders or move my infielders around. Now, there were times when I felt like, yeah, we should be playing these guys in a shift, one way or the other, and I would do it. But that's become a real big deal lately, and rightly so, because, the difference between, like Ted Williams, they used to shift him, but he didn't care. He hit the ball so hard, he beat the shift. But now there are guys, Mustakas and some of the pull-hitting left-handers where your shortstop is behind second base, and your second baseman's in right field, short right field, and your first baseman's deep on the line. These guys can't run, but they don't quit. They just keep hitting the ball into the shift. Well, it doesn't pay off. Now, I think Hosmer, he started to go to left center, and it made all the difference last year for him, where he started to use the whole field, and the shift, the shift was not beneficial for him. He could hit the ball the other way, and he should. And actually, I saw Mustakas bunt for a hit several times, which, if I'm the manager and they're giving me the bunt, and my guy's left-handed, and he can't bunt, I'm going to get somebody else, because I want to take advantage of whatever they're giving me, and that puts a runner on first base, and it puts pressure on the other team. So, hey, I might trade. When I trade, hey, they have somebody in the minor leagues that, has plays good defense and plays third base and can bunt for a hit and steal bases. Yeah, I'll take that guy in a heartbeat. And then I don't have to worry about Mustakas popping up and pulling the ball on the ground to the right side. I've got a guy that if they play him that way, then I can bunt for a hit and I can steal a base, and now I'm already got a guy at second base with nobody out. So, that's my mentality, is I'm going to exploit every part of the game against the other team that I can. I'm going to put pressure on them. I'm not going to sacrifice bunt. My guys are going to be able to bunt for a hit because they won't know whether to play in, because knowing that I'm going to bunt, or whether they're going to be able to play back, and I can take advantage of that. So that's just the way I managed. And the start we had in Birmingham, I had Robin Ventura, Richie Amaral, and Craig Graybeck. Those were three of my guys that went to the big leagues. We started out 14-0, and we're 18-1, and they called us the runaway train. So we won 55 games the first half of the season, and it was fun because the other team didn't know what we were going to do. We never indicated that we were going to sacrifice bunt. We did whatever we wanted to do, but my guys could do it. If I put on a bunt for a hit, I knew that I had guys that can do that. So I had confidence in them, and they had confidence in me, and it was a really fun year.
You're talking about 1989, yes, when you guys won the Southern League, and Graybeck was your cleanup hitter, and he was the MVP of that league, so the most outstanding player. And so what did that year mean to you? What did that championship season, winning season, mean to you? And Just, I know you said it was a lot of fun, but just take me back through that and how special that was to you to win as a manager.
Well, I had a blast. It was really my first managing job, I think, in a position where I had guys that were not very far away from. In fact, we had like 6 of them, I think, that went right to the big leagues from Double A. I had, several pitchers, and of course, Robin went, and Graybeck went, and Emerald went, and then I think I had one other guy that was Matt Marullo might have gone. I can't remember, and then a couple of my pitchers. So it was a fun year. After we won the championship, Robin threw me in the swimming pool with my clothes on, and the guys were great. They didn't ever back away. I had one of my pitchers one time tell me, I came in the dugout. He said, "Skip." I said, "Yeah." He said, "You got to watch your body language." I said, "Really?" I said, "What am I doing?" He says, "Oh, if somebody doesn't do something right or doesn't perform up to the, what you're expecting," he says, "you're letting it show a little bit out there in that third base coaching box." And I said, "Oh, I appreciate it." It was Grady Hall, and he had a really good year that year. So I appreciated that. They didn't look at me as some guy that was a real hard case that was going to get on them. But the funny part, you mentioned Graybeck was my MVP, which he was. He had 87 RBIs, and he came into my office and walked in and sat down. And he said, "Skip," he said, "I got a problem." And I said, "Well, what is it?" He said, "If I lose another pound, I'm going to weigh 140 pounds." He was only 5'5", and he was weighing 140. And if he went out, in Birmingham, the heat was just oppressive, and you'd sweat. And so I told him, "Hey, stay inside and watch TV, and nobody's going to care. You just go out there." And because he played every game, you couldn't get him out of the lineup. And he was such a good athlete that he was a scratch golfer. He could drive being 5'5", 140 pounds, he could drive the ball 300 yards. So I had just an exceptionally wide range of different kind of players, but they I tried to mold them and take advantage of the things that they could do well, and that's what we did. And it was a real interesting year, and we had a blast.
Who gave you the nickname the Bandit?
One of the sports writers, I think, in Chicago. After a year or two up there, and I, stole a few home runs and went over the fence and stuff. They call me the Bandit, and that's the name that I really associate with somebody that knows something about baseball. When they refer to me as a Bandit, then I know that they know what was important in my lifetime.
Now, who was your favorite manager in the big leagues? Was it Stanky or was it somebody else?
Well, I had three managers that I refer to that I tried to put into my mold myself into, basically. Stanky was a manager that a lot of players couldn't play for him because he was too demanding. He was not a positive guy. He would rip you in a heartbeat. But I learned more about the game and how not to give up outs. He says, "We only get 27 outs." He says, "We're not going to give any of them up." So I learned a lot of the situational baseball where if, and I can't go into it because I elaborate on the radio because it would take too long, but just for instance, when you have a runner at second, third, and there's a ground ball, and you have told your runner on second that the guy on third is running, then he's going to come to third base. You give him a sign to let him know whether he's going or he's not going on a ground ball. And so if that guy, they throw home and the guy on third's in a rundown, when they run him back, the catcher's going to run him back to third base, and now you have a guy on third base already. Well, what you do is the guy that's going back to the base, you go back and touch the base, and then you give a little nudge in the guy's side and tell him to go when the catcher's about 10 feet away, because the catcher knows that all he's got to do is come down and touch both runners, and somebody's going to be called out. If the trail runner's out because it's not his base. So if that guy leaves and goes back towards second base, you create a real problem because the catcher is 10 feet away from the base. He's not used to making a throw to second base, and the shortstop is probably over at third base because there was a rundown. The catcher's there. The pitcher now is at home plate, and the third baseman's there. So when that guy takes off and runs back towards second base, he's got a chance to run into the shortstop, or he's going to run back, and they're going to have a long throw from the catcher to the second baseman, who now is going to run the guy back toward third, and the guy on third is going to reverse the process and do exactly what the guy on second did. And when he gets to third, the guy on third is going to run toward home and try to run into the catcher because he's still standing there. So then if you do get by him and don't get hit, they throw the ball or throw it to the pitcher who's not used to covering the base and catching the ball and making a tag. So that was just one play that Eddie Stanky taught us that made all the difference in the world because we knew that we were never going to give up an out. Okay, so that was the one thing he's on my list as the number one for teaching the game. Dale Crandall was the only manager that I ever played for that used the delayed steal. You don't see the delayed steal in the big leagues hardly at all, and it's a great play, and it'll work as long as everything falls into place. Normally you'd like to have a left-hand hitter. You like to have a guy that's fairly quick to home, and you like to have a guy at first. It doesn't have to be a guy that can run fast, but you have to have a guy that's got good timing. And when the ball's thrown and it passes the hitter, nobody says anything because that guy on first has shuffled off and done his secondary lead. And when the ball's going into the catcher's glove, that's when he breaks. Now the catcher can't see him running because the left-hand hitter blocks him out. So the second baseman and shortstop they glance at the runner to see if he's stealing because they've got to cover if he does, but they don't see him leave, so they stay in their position a lot of times. And then if they're not breaking, then it's a all-out race for second base with the runner and the ball and the fielder getting there at the same time. And normally the catcher has to double pump, and then he throws it, and a lot of times the ball ends up in center field. So to me, that's one of the best plays in the game of baseball, but it never gets used. Okay, so that was my number two, Del Crandall. And then Chuck Tanner, when the end of my year in 1970, I got traded in 71, but at the end of the year, we had such a bad team, they hired Chuck Tanner to come in for the last month of the year, and he was going to come in and take a look at the team and see what he thought he could do to change it and make it better. Roland Heeman was the general manager, and they made a great pair. They made a super trade when they traded me to California, and they got Jay Johnstone and Tom Bradley and Tom Egan. Bradley won like 15 to 18 games for him 3 or 4 years in a row. Johnstone hit 270 or whatever and hit some home runs and played good center field. And Egan was a catcher. The other guys that went with me to California didn't ever hardly play. So I was basically the only guy. So I didn't think it was a very good trade looking back on it for California, but it worked out great for the White Sox. So Chuck Tanner came in, and I did my job whenever I could to move a runner over from second to third with nobody out. So I would bunt for a hit, or I'd hit a ground ball to the right side and get him over, and I did. So Chuck, we hadn't seen him for a day. He's only been there for a couple days. So this situation came up. I moved the runner, and I'm jogging back into the dugout, and I get close to where the warning track is, right by the dugout, and Chuck Tanner is running at me. And I thought I'd missed the sign, and he was going to come out and clock me or something. And he came out and he grabbed me. And if you didn't know Chuck Tanner, he's one of the strongest men in baseball. at that time, and he's about 6'3" or 6'4" and 230 pounds, but he was strong. And he grabbed me and hugged me, and he says, "That's the way to get that runner over." And I couldn't believe it. I'd never played for a manager so positive about the game. And so those were my three managers. Chuck Tanner for being positive and being a good manager and aggressive. Stanky for learning, everything that I could about the game, how not to give up outs. And Del Crandall for the delayed steal. And, I played for a lot of managers. I played for 11 of them. And those were my favorites.
Well, Tanner obviously did something right as he won a World Series with the Pirates in '79. May he rest in peace. So let's talk about '66. And you guys in '66, you hovered around 500 or under 500 for a good portion of the season. And then in August, you guys finished the season 89-73. You go 20-12 in August, and you guys go above 500 for good in August. So what exactly changed there in '66 for the reasons that you guys were 500 or under 500? Then what changes in August then in '66?
You're pushing me to go back so long. I couldn't tell you. I really couldn't tell you. 66 was just kind of like a lost year for me. I don't know why, but I don't remember a whole lot about it. Because 67 we were in the race, and 65 we were in the race, or 64 we were in the race, and 66 now that was, what did I hit then? 270.
Now you guys, I'll have to see, but you guys, you didn't do too bad, but you remember you had that 20-game hitting streak too in Chicago too.
Right, didn't I hit 270 though?
I'll have to see, but you.
When did I hit 271 in one of those years, and that was when they had, I think it was 66, when they had the turf, the AstroTurf in there, and then in 67 when Stanky came over, they tore it out and put in grass again, sod again.
Sure enough, you did hit 271 in '66. Yes.
Yeah. So that was I don't know. It was a year that nothing really sticks out to me other than I hit pretty well, and part of the reason was playing on turf is so much quicker, and I hit a lot of ground balls, and I was more of a line drive hitter, and 270. When you hit 270 and you're a Gold Glove center fielder, nowadays put that in perspective. What I would be making if I was playing now. I mean, it was a big deal. But then the next 2 years or 3 years with Stanky there, we didn't have that luxury. The ground was soaking wet with our sinker ball pitchers, and it was to our advantage because we had a slower bunch of infielders. So Don Buford and I led the team in hitting 241. And Don Buford was not a bad hitter. He went to the Orioles in a trade, and he went over there and he hit pretty well for them. So, and I went to California and hit pretty well. So I know that was a good portion of it was the infield was wet down so badly we couldn't drive a ball through.
Yes, and Buford, that was part of that very loaded Orioles offense that went to the World Series 3 straight years from '69 to '71, winning in '70. And when you had that 20-game hitting streak, what goes into that, and how much did you think about that hitting streak during that time? What kind of, I don't know if you had any rituals. I know you talked about some of that earlier, but what was going on?
No, I didn't. I had no rituals. I jumped over the shot at third base or first base when I ran in. That was probably the only thing. Once I got into that hitting streak, I was really hot, and then toward the end. That was back when the guys that were in the position to negotiate things with the players' reps and stuff, we didn't have a whole lot of say like they did after Lou Brock, got his thing in there with free agency. So we weren't able to negotiate a lot of stuff. So we had a lot of 19, 18-day road trips with no days off. And all I remember is we came home from a long road trip, and I was going to hit that night against Fritz Peterson, who I always got 2 or 3 hits off of. And I always felt comfortable against him, and I got up there that night, and I don't think, I might have gotten 1 hit, but I know that I was in trouble because my swing wasn't feeling right, and then, you know, I think that was the 19th or 20th game, and I might have got a blue pit the next day or something, but then I went over. So, you know, I knew it was about done, and then I kind of cooled off after that. But I was hot for a while.
That was the year you made the All-Star team in '67, and let's talk about that. I know that, you know, with Hank Bauer, though, got an interesting story with Hank Bauer that I know that he passed up on you, or that he wasn't too crazy about you, but, you know, it's funny because you're playing the Orioles, and you hit a home run off of Tom Phoebus, and you're on the bases, and you say, take that, Bauer, and, you know, that's a crazy game. That game goes 15 innings, and Tony Perez has the game-winning home run against Catfish Hunter, and you had the unfortunate distinction of being the final out, striking out against the rookie Tom Seaver, and so what do you remember about that game, if you knew you were going to get in that game or not, if you were worried you were going to get in that game or not, and what was the dugout like, and what did Bauer say to you then when he pinch hit for you in the 15th?
He never talked to me at all, and this was going back to a couple days before the All-Star game when we flew into Baltimore. The sports writers came up and said, "Hey, you've been selected for the All-Star team. You were number 4 out of the 5 guys that were voted." And they always voted for 5 outfielders, so I was voted number 4. And, you know, what do you think? And, you know, I was, hey, great. You know, thanks a lot for telling me. And so we get into the ballpark that night, and one of the sports writers came back and said, well, he said, I'm sorry, but you're not going to the All-Star game. I said, well, what do you mean? You know, you just told me I was. He said, well, Hank Bauer's decided he's not going to take you. Well, I don't know why somebody didn't raise a stink about it or something, but nobody said a word. And so I thought, well, okay. And so you said, I hit a home run and I ran around third, and I said, hey, take that, Bauer. And so the next night, Frank Robinson slid into Al Weiss, and Robbie got a double vision, and Al Weiss's knee was blown out. And I thought, well, maybe I shouldn't have yelled at Bauer when I hit the home run. Maybe he would have taken me then. And nope, didn't take me again. So Sunday, we're playing, and we're leaving right after the game, and we got to after the game, and somebody said Al Kaline broke his knuckle on a water cooler when he popped up with the bases loaded in Detroit, and Bauer said he's going to take you. Well, you know, that was kind of it made me happy, but it didn't make me happy. You know, knowing that I was number 4 out of 5, and then knowing that I was not taken after one guy got hurt, then after 2 guys got hurt, I'm going, okay. So, you know, by the time I got to Anaheim and got out there and spent a day around the other guys, it was, you know, it's really an honor to be in with that group that was there. But Bauer never said a word to me, never went out of his way to come up and say, hey, you know, glad you finally got on it. You know, I'm sorry I didn't pick you earlier or whatever. You know, he didn't have to say anything, and he did. So we get to the park, and, you know, I look at the lineup, and I'm not playing, and they go through the first 6, 7 innings, and I'm thinking, well, you know, normally, because I followed the All-Star game, I watch it every year, and I know normally that the guys that aren't starting around the 6th or 7th inning, they put in the, whatever you want to call them, the second guys or the Scribinis or the, you know, whatever they also ran. You put those guys in and you let them get a little, you know, playing time. And it's like when you come down to the end of a basketball game and your team's up by 20 and you have 2 minutes left, you put in the guys that never play. So I sat there, and I was on the far end of the bench, and he was down on the other end. So I never walked down that way. I didn't say a word to anybody, and nobody saying to me about, well, maybe he's going to put you in. None of the coaches came up. So we got to the 15th inning, and there's 2 outs, and then, he goes, "Get a bat, Barry." That was it. He told me, "Get a bat." So I grabbed my bat and I went up, and I wasn't paying any attention to who was pitching because I don't know if he'd pitched to the 2 guys before or not, but I pretty much given up that I was going to get in the game. And so I grabbed my bat, loosened up, walked up, and took 3 good swings and didn't touch the ball, and that was it. That was the end of my experience as an all-star. So it was, I felt like I probably could have been selected the year I hit 289 in California and got a Gold Glove, but I wasn't again. And there were an awful lot of good players that went before me that were. So I'm not bitter about it. It was a weird situation where you actually are voted in by the players and the coaches, and then the manager says, "I'm not taking you." So that was my all-star experience.
Well, at least you had an all-star experience. That's a good thing. A lot of great players. You think of Kirk Gibson, Tim Salmon. They never made all-star games. Kirk Gibson, he was the guy who won MVP in '88, and he didn't make the all-star game ever in his career. So at least you had an all-star experience. But that 60s.
I got one.
Yeah, you do, and that's a pretty, it's an unfortunate one that you were the final out, but that still is a very interesting story. And you guys, as a team, we talked about earlier a little bit, the White Sox hit 225 as a team that year in '67, and what made Comiskey Park a tough place for hitters that year, do you think?
Well, it was every year. When you're in Comiskey Park, number one, start with the infield grass being, I'm not talking about just spraying a little water on it. I'm talking about soaking it out to almost to the pitcher's mound, where anything you hit hard up the middle, and that's where a good hitter is trying to focus on hitting the ball hard up the middle. And when you hit a ground ball and they easily get to it, and when it's hit hard, and you can ask any of the old players that played with me, they're going to say the same thing, I'm sure. But the scoreboard in center field, when you're looking at any of the parks now that are being built and any of the older parks, they have all got a big area back there of black or green, a background where you can see the pitcher throwing the ball and there's no distraction. But we had a scoreboard that was 3 stories high. It had numbers, scores, letters. I mean, it was blinking lights, the whole thing. And that's what we were looking at, trying to pick up the ball. So, you're trying to pick up spin on a curveball. You're trying to see the ball out of the guy's hand on a changeup, and it was just almost impossible to do. So, amazingly, we hit as well as we did, to be honest with you.
Now, for what reasons were the likes of Weiss, Buford, A.G. McCraw, for what reasons were they all traded? And with you guys going 67 and 95 in 68, did you know that those trades lead to a downturn?
Well, to be honest with you, it was stupidity on the part of the general manager. I have to say that honestly. What we did is we went from where I mentioned earlier, we went from pitching, speed, and defense to pitching, no speed, and home run potential. But we went from guys that were young to Kenny Boyer, Rocky Colavito, Tommy Davis with a bad leg. Those 3 guys were at the end of their career. So basically what we did is we tried to make that run in 67 and relied on these older players. And we took away all of our speed and our defense. Tommy McCraw he was like Hosmer. He's a Gold Glove first baseman. He never got one, but he was adequate enough to be a Gold Glover. And A.G., obviously, he was a very good center fielder. And Buford could play outfield or infield, but he was all those three guys, and Weiss played great second base, but they all could steal 20, 25 bases, in the right situation. With the right manager, they would have all stolen 25 bases. So once we got out of the heavy, stinky era of stealing and pitching and defense, and they got rid of all of our speed, that pretty well did it. And then when they made the trade for me, then Chuck Tanner brought over the Big Bopper, and they got him, and then Bradley was winning games, and then Carlos May and Bill Melton and guys in the minor leagues, Eddie Herman. It was just like when you have 5 or 6 guys like the Rangers had last year, or the Astros, come out of your own organization that are going to come and play and provide a real solid position in 5 spots. That's what happened. It's just a matter of taking those guys out with no speed. We were done. So now Chuck Tanner comes in, and he's got help me with the guy I'm thinking of. One of the best hitters in baseball. I can't even come up with his name. The Phillies. He played for the Phillies, and then came over to.
Yeah, Dick Allen.
Yeah, Dick Allen, Richie Allen. Okay, we call him Richie because I played against him in the minor leagues. But Dick Allen. Okay, so you stick Dick Allen with Bill Melton, who hit 30 home runs a lot, and Carlos May, who hit 300, and Eddie Herman, who could hit for power. And then you put in the pitching that they had and the defense, and Chuck Tanner had a ready-made team right there. He loved it. That was a perfect team for him because they could do some things. They could run, and John Stone stole some bases. And I was not a great base stealer because I didn't know how to steal bases. And nobody ever talked to me about how to read pitchers. So when I started coaching in the minor leagues, I started to learn how to read pitchers. And then pretty soon here I am teaching guys how to steal bases, and knowing that I could have done it if I'd, been a little more aware of things when I was playing. So, it's just a total change for me as far as looking at the game in a different way. But that's probably the biggest thing that happened to our team is we gave away all of our speed, and we relied on our pitching, but we didn't have defense anymore. We were slow, couldn't steal bases, and then pretty soon Gary Peters goes to Boston, and Joe Harlan's at the end of his road, and Buzzard's gone, and Bizarro's gone, and it was a totally different team.
Now, you do realize you were never actually teammates with Dick Allen on the White Sox because he joined in '72 when you were on the Angels.
Yeah, I know. I wasn't, but I'm saying that was the change when I got traded, and Dick Allen came over and joined Johnstone and Bradley and Egan with Melton and Herman and those guys. That made that team because they needed somebody like him that was a leader, and he really gave them a shot in the arm offensively.
And just to know from earlier, you mentioned it was Kurt Flood, not Lou Brock from the Cardinals, with the whole.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's all good. It's all good.
I know it was Kurt Flood. Yeah, you're forcing me to really come up with some answers here, and I think I'm passing on most of them.
It's all good. It's all good. Just wanted to point out for our listeners, though, and just in case they're saying, "Oh, Kurt Flood,"
because I would have woke up tonight about 4 in the morning, and I would have. Oh no, I meant to say Kurt Flood, and I said Lou Brock.
No, it's all good. It's all good. But what went through your mind when you were traded to the Angels? Because the White Sox were the only team you had known at that point. You debuted with them in '62, and then you had through 1970. So, what was going through your mind when you had been traded to the Angels?
Well, I think several things. First of all, I was probably disappointed from the standpoint of I loved the month that I played for Chuck Tanner. Like I said, he was the most positive manager I'd ever been around, really upbeat, really aggressive. I fit right into what I felt like would be a situation that I would love to play for him. I think probably going to California, I was really happy about that because I knew that I didn't have to put up with White Sox Park anymore with with the background. And another thing, I mean, I'm not trying to nitpick here, but when you have a nice, smooth outfield to work with, it makes it a lot easier. We had a lot of low spots where in Chicago it's been known to rain there every now and then. If they got a hard rain and then they pulled the tarp off and dumped the water, and then you start the game up again, you could be chasing a fly ball and be running full speed and run into a low spot where the water was about an inch or so deep, and you have water be flying all over the place, and then you're expected to go and make the play. So that was not a lot of fun. So when I went to California, it was like going and playing on a green on a golf course where everything was level. Not greens are not level, but I should say maybe the fairway more. But it was just, the grass was great. The weather was perfect, 85 to 90 during the day, and then at night, 75 to 65, 75. It was just a great experience to go from that, from the weather in Chicago, where one day I'll never forget, we started the game, it was an afternoon game. We started around 1 o'clock. And it was 89 degrees, and the wind was blowing that straight out to the lake from the southwest. And when we got done, the wind was blowing straight in about 40 miles an hour, and it was 38 degrees or 36 degrees. It was coming on right off the lake. So we had like a 60-degree drop, and you never had that in California. You didn't have that problem.
Let's talk about Milwaukee and the possibility of the White Sox moving there or playing select home games at County Stadium in the late 60s. What did you think of that, being able to have some games at County Stadium, home games in the late 60s? And if you thought they were going to move it...
Not being able to have, being forced to have. See, that's back when we didn't have a whole lot of power with our player reps. We couldn't complain about it, so you just put up with it. So, we're not going to fly up, but we're going to drive up, and it's a couple-hour drive, and it's a couple-hour drive back, and then you're getting back late in the, 1 or 2 in the morning, and going up there and playing one game. And Milwaukee's, after I got traded from California, went to Milwaukee, and that was brutal cold up there for the first couple months of the season, as I found out once I was traded there. And I keep sounding like I'm complaining. I'm not complaining. It's just that a friend of mine, we were talking the other day. We're out to lunch, and a lot of people say I'm out to lunch, but we were out eating lunch, and we were talking about the first part of the season, the first 2 or 3 weeks, where why don't you schedule the teams that are in the north, schedule them with the teams in the south and play there? But, then it's unfair to the teams because you're on the road for 2 weeks. So I'm sure that they had to do that, and they mix it up and change it and all that. But that was what happened when I played in Milwaukee. It was brutally cold. And, your question about what did I think about it, I think they were just trying to create some interest up there. And, they'd lost the team. They'd gone to Seattle, and they were trying to get a team back. So, I didn't like it because, once you came home, you drove to the park. It was maybe 20 minutes to the park, and you got there at 4:30 or 4 o'clock, and you could kind of relax and then go out and do your thing. And then in Milwaukee, you had to get there early, and you had to get on a bus, and you had to go 2 hours, and then you get off, you get dressed, and, it just created, it was just not the norm for me.
Well, it was the Braves who moved from Milwaukee to Atlanta, and then the Pilots, after '69, they became the Brewers. But there was talk of the White Sox. There was talk of the White Sox moving to Milwaukee, and so how much what did you think of the White Sox possibly moving to Milwaukee, or people possibly speculating of that? How relieved were you when you found out they were staying in Chicago?
Well, I didn't pay attention to that. I was the kind of guy that I went to the park, I played the game. When the game was over, I went home. I didn't even bother to read the paper that much. So when there was talk about it, I mean, as a player, what are you going to do? You can't do anything about it. You know, and if you spend too much time, if you're not in favor, you spend too much time thinking about it, then you're thinking negatively. And if you get all fired up about it and you really want to go and then they don't do it, then it turns out to be a negative again. So I don't know. I didn't put a whole lot of stock in it. I just didn't like going up there and playing. And, you know, after I ended up playing up there, I didn't like it there either. The county stadium was an old ballpark, and you know, the DH was just coming. It just started that year, designated hitter, and they decided I was going to be the designated hitter, and Bobby Coluccio was supposed to be the next center fielder. You know, and I was 34 years old, I believe, and I was right at close to the end of my career, so they made me the DH and gave the center field job to Bobby. And he didn't do the job, and so when it came time to make a decision, they put me in the lineup, and this was probably late June, and I ended up hitting 300 the rest of the year and had a pretty good year, and then they released me. So it was, you know, it was not a good experience in Milwaukee, but, you know, I just, like I say, the clubhouse was about, it seemed like a half a mile away from the dugout, and if you're the DH and it's 38 degrees and you're sitting in the dugout and there's no way to warm up unless you go up into the clubhouse and sit up there for a while and listen to the game and then come back down. But I didn't know how to handle DHing. I didn't know what the manager's going to say if I wasn't on the bench watching the game, because that was what I was used to. Is I was always there in the game trying to learn and take advantage of what I saw. So why would I go to the clubhouse? But the clubhouse, when you got up there, a lot of guys now, I mean, you can go into any park, I think, in the major leagues, and you can go back, and when you're a DH, you can go back and have one of the coaches slip back there and throw balls to you so that you can stay sharp and be loose. And then when you come up to hit, you feel like you're ready to go. But we didn't even have a batting cage. There was no batting cage. So how was I going to get any swing? So it was kind of a dilemma for me. I didn't handle it very well, I'm sure. But I didn't complain. I just didn't know what to do.
You did, yes, you played in Milwaukee, and your last stop was in Cleveland in '75, and you got a hit in your final game. That was against Paul Lindblad of Oakland. Did any teams reach out to you at that point after Cleveland let you go?
Yeah, and I probably messed up looking at it one way, and I didn't mess up looking at it the other way. My wife and I were not married at that time. She had lost her husband, and I had gone through a divorce, and we just met over the winter. And when I got released, I was pretty happy to be going home and spending the last 3 months at home. And she and I were able to get to know each other. And I got a phone call from Kansas City. They wanted me to go to Omaha, their AAA team, and play, and then come back up at the end of the year and play the last months in Kansas City. And I think they wanted me to probably think about coaching in the minor leagues. And you know, eventually I was looking forward to coaching. I loved coaching, and I liked the managing and everything. But I just didn't, my heart wasn't in it. I was trying to make the transition from being divorced to someone that meant an awful lot to me at that point. We were talking about marriage and everything, and I just didn't want to do baseball anymore. I was kind of to the point where I was done. So I probably should have taken that opportunity, and then since it was Kansas City, if I'd been picked or selected as a coach in Kansas City, we could have moved to Kansas City. You know, so you know it all worked out, but they talked to me with the White Sox when I had two little ones, or we had two little ones. After Birmingham, we made the playoffs the next year also, and they wanted me to go to Vancouver and manage so that they could prepare me for the big leagues as a manager. And I decided that that wasn't what I wanted at that point because we had a young family, and I didn't want to be traveling all the time, flying all over and be away. So I turned them down, and they decided that they had no more interest in me, and so I had to move on. But that, that was my decision, and I'm glad I made it.
Right, and it's not always the right time for everyone anyway, but you did eventually get into coaching and managing, and you have spent decades doing that. And your first season as a manager, you're managing short season A-ball in the Yankees organization. They have this one guy named John Elway. And he's in the minors. He had .318 with a .432 on-base percentage, 4 homers, 25 RBIs. And with you managing Elway, we all know what he would go on to be, but what do you think that he did right that season under you, and how much of a career do you think he could have had if he made the choice to choose baseball?
Okay, you're probably the 30th or 40th person to ever ask me that, so it's something that I'm used to answering. When I was managing, the interest in him, and I didn't realize how great the interest was until I started to kind of research his background and what he'd gone through, and being drafted by Baltimore and not, I guess Baltimore, and not accepting it, or Indianapolis, whoever it was. And I just saw a deal on 30 by 30 the other day, I think it was, regarding that, and I saw the whole story, so it's pretty interesting. So I had people from Time Magazine, Sports Illustrated, and, all the different writers, and guys wanted to interview me as to what about John Elway? What's he going to do? And I said, I have no idea, but he's the kind of guy that I pictured him hitting somewhere between the high 250s up around 280 in the big leagues. Right fielder with a cannon. Nobody's going to run on him. Good, solid fielder. Probably hit 12 to 15 home runs. That was back then. Nowadays, I would probably have to say 20 to 25, but back then I had him, because he was a line drive hitter. He didn't show a lot of power. Probably steal 10 or 15 bases because he was smart. He would figured out how to get a jump. So I had him playing in the big leagues, and if he didn't, he would have been there as probably a fourth or fifth outfielder if he was on an exceptional team where he wasn't going to play. He would be a DH or a pinch hitter type guy, play part time. So I had him going to the big leagues. But then when I went home that fall, this is 1982, I got to see him play for Stanford about 6 times because it was a big deal. So they put Stanford on all the time on ESPN, and I got to see it. And I knew at that point he wasn't going to play baseball. He was going to be a big-time quarterback with some NFL team. So, I still felt if he wanted to play baseball, he could have made it to the big leagues.
Well, with you, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, like they say, and someone who didn't make it but had a pretty good minor league career was your own son, Lane, nicknamed Boomer, who played in the White Sox farm system just like his dad did, yourself. And, he had a .284 career batting average in the minors. He stole 29 bases, had a .386 OBP, but yet he never got past AA. How come it didn't work out with him, do you think?
Well, I'm not sure, because after his first year, he was a non-drafted player and went to Great Falls. In rookie, he stayed with the extended spring team, and the guys that were his coaches, I knew them from the White Sox. I went in there and talked to him. I said, how's he doing? And he said, oh, he's doing great. He's going to be my leadoff hitter or my second place hitter, and he's playing really well at second base, and so I thought, well, good. And then he went to Great Falls, and he hit a grand slam the day before the end of the season to clinch the pennant for them, to get them in the playoffs. He was voted the most valuable player, and went to spring training the next year, and he was going to go to a full A team, or a full year A team somewhere. I didn't know where, but I was kind of pleased with the way everything went. So he called me up, and he usually called, or I called him to see how he did that day, and he said, I did good. And usually he never said that. He'd always say, I did okay, and I did fine. And I said, oh, you did good. I said, what'd you do, go 5 for 5 today or something? No. So see, he's playing with me. And I said, oh, you played in the AA game. No. You played in the AAA game. No. And I could tell, and then I got to thinking, okay, what's the date? Oh, yeah, they're leaving for Chicago. You played in the Major League game. I said, yes. I said, you went in for the second baseman who they took out in the second inning or third inning. He said, yes. I said, how'd you do? Break it to me, man. Let's go. He said, I was 3 for 3 with 2 stolen bases and an RBI, and was on TV back to Chicago, and I was the player of the game. How's that? And I thought, man. And so we just watched the game the other day. Of course, Ken Harrelson was the announcer, and he was my boss with Chicago for 1 year. He was the general manager, and he hired me as a coach in Chicago. And then Darren Jackson, who's his sidekick, I was Darren's outfield instructor in Chicago. So, I knew both these guys really well. So, they mentioned me on the when they were talking. I'm sure Kenny Berry's back there in Topeka, happy to see his boy Lane, Boomer, blah blah blah. And so, it was a really neat deal. And then he went to play the next year, and they drafted Chris Getz in the 10th round or the 4th round or whatever it was. And my wife said, well, that's it. Boomer's done. And I said, no, he's not. And his problem was he was a little older, because they told me that they were going to take him to spring training, but they couldn't get him into the rookie team, on the rookie team the year before. So he was about 23 years old. And he was All-American at Central Missouri, which is was a powerhouse. They finished first in the nation as the Division II team. So he had a second place, a first place, a third place, and a fourth place finish in the World Series with Central Missouri, and he tied there was one hit short of the all-time record for both base hits. So I knew the kid could play. I knew he was a little short with the arm, but his range was great. He got super jumps. He's good at reading the pitchers. He could steal bases. He could bunt for a hit. He made contact. He didn't strike out. He hit about 380 to 400 every year. So I knew he could do the job if they would just give him a chance. And I don't know what happened, but once Getz got there, he had to move to third base. He never played third in his life. So I went in to watch, and he was a little uncomfortable at third base. But Getz then they moved him up to AA, and then he moved back to second base, and he drove in the RBI that won the championship for him and got him the rings. And then next year in spring training, they released him. So I don't know what it was, age or whatever, but I still thought, and I still know, that if given the opportunity, he would have been able to contribute. It might have been as an extra infielder or something, but he did enough things good that would help a team win. So that's what happened.
And some players never get that chance. Sometimes it waits longer than others. I can tell you, I see the Cardinals a lot, and Jose Martinez, he's off to a great start this year, even though he's in his 30s. And it took him a while to get that opportunity, but he finally got it. And
Right.
I think of Brock Stassi, who was a career minor leaguer with the Phillies until he finally got his call last year for opening day. He made the team, and he was so excited for that. But it seemed like it seemed like that your son did pretty well in the minor league stats wise. And Chris Getz, I remember him, and he didn't even spend that long time with the team. Sometime during the 2000s before he was shipped out to Kansas City. And with
Right.
you yourself, you're a big deal in Kansas. You're part of the Kansas Sports Hall of Fame. And the Southwest Youth Athletic Association in Shawnee County is named after you, the Ken Berry League. What does that honor mean to you?
Well, it's a real honor. You hit the right word. In 1969, I was not having the best of years, and we had about 7 or 8 guys that were in the southwest part of Topeka, and they decided they wanted to start a little league out there, and they wanted to name it after me. And I told them, I said, you better check the stats because I'm not hitting that well this year to be naming a league after me. And they said, no, we want to do that. Well, I knew all these guys. I lived close to most of them, and they were just businessmen that were very, very sincere about their efforts, and they put money up, and they donated land and got it started. And it's been there's 2,000 kids playing in it now, and generally everybody that I run into say, well, I spend more time out at your park. And I said, well, do you have fun? Yeah. It's been a great experience. So that's all I never get people that complain about it. What they all say is that it's great, and, we appreciate it. And I said, well, I really have nothing to do with it other than my name, but I'm very pleased that, and it's an honor that people are able to, every year there's 2,000 kids out there, and people are having a great time, so it means a lot to me.
With you last year, you have given advice and lessons to softball players as well, and you coached at your alma mater, Washburn Rural, the softball team on an interim basis. You guys won 16-5, and this is a team that has won 2 Class 6A state championships before. A very good program, and you guys did well. You lost in the sub-state semifinals, and you wanted to come back this year, but they wouldn't let you. And so what did you most enjoy about coaching that softball team last spring, and how much do you miss it?
Well, I miss it a lot. Basically, the reason I got the job is several of my hitters' parents, girls that I work with, said, hey, they don't have a coach yet. Why don't you apply? And I said, I don't want to apply for that job. Why not? Why do I want to do that? And then I got to thinking about it, and I thought, well, the more I thought about it, there are only 3 or 4 road trips, and the road trips are an hour, and that's it. And most of the games are played right in Topeka. I knew several of the girls. And, of course, I know most of the coaches and people that were affiliated with the school, and the athletic director was a lady, and I had given her daughter batting lessons when she was younger, so I knew her pretty well. And so finally I got to the point where I thought, well, I'll call, and her name is Penny. I'll call Penny and see what she thinks. And so I called her up, and she says, well, you should apply. They said, you go online and blah, blah, blah. So I did, and so they interviewed me, and it'd been a situation where I think they had one other person that they had interviewed from the school, but they decided not to take her for some reason.